In March of 2022, a game was announced that sent waves of excitement through the ranks of Formula 1 gaming fans. F1 Manager 2022 was supposed to be the motorsport equivalent of the successful management gaming genre. But a little over a year later, the heartbeat of the game is slowly starting to fade. A tale of lost opportunities and unfulfilled potential. How it got so far and what loot box mechanics may have to do with it is coming up now. And with that, welcome back to Overtake. F1 Manager is a name you probably haven't heard in a while. To understand the current state of the title, we first have to take a look at the journey the game went through. The announcement garnered over 2 million views on Twitter, and a multitude of articles and videos all throughout the web titled F1 the hot new thing on the market. The hype for the release in spring of 2022 was enormous. And in theory, everything should have worked out the way they thought. Management games are very popular amongst every generation of gamers nowadays. They often offer tasks which require in-depth knowledge of the scene or sport and play well over multiple seasons, making this the perfect fit for the F1 environment, at least in theory. You know, we know a thing or two about having the right environment for virtual F1. So if you leave a like, a sub, and hit the bell, I'm sure you will be able to agree with me in no time. But back to F1 Manager. So naturally, after a lot of hype pre-release, the content leading up to day one was amping up as well. Streams, videos, and more gameplay reveals made the round, creating a buzz that is rare for racing games nowadays. Features like an abundance of real-life radio messages or really impressive graphics, at least for a management title, were some of the focal points of the early marketing campaign. But also the suspense to see if a game like this could be the start of a whole new subgenre to racing games, similar to Rocket League or Trackmania maybe, just less gameplay orientated. And when players finally got their hands on F1 Manager, they liked it for a week. Or maybe 2. But shortly after release, we kind of saw a downwards trend starting to form. Content from the streaming world was getting less, player numbers dropped significantly, and many problems started to rise to the surface. The end result is kind of what we have today. I dare to say, a forgotten title. Nowadays, the Twitter feed of the development page is more F1 coverage than any game-related news. Having said all of this and looking at it from my personal perspective makes me kind of sad, but also makes me ask myself, what went wrong? What's the reason F1 Manager shriveled up like an old raisin so fast? To answer that, we have our very own fruit expert Jacob from the editorial team with us today that is going to tell you everything about the downfall of a dynasty that never existed.
Hey everyone, I'm Jacob, and a year ago I was so excited when I saw the first announcements about F1 Manager. I thought it was going to be just what we needed. Of course, I picked up the game as soon as I could and gave it a go, but pretty much immediately, I was left a little bit disappointed. Even though it was dressed up very nicely, there were quite a lot of issues bubbling just beneath the surface of what seemed like a very polished title. So here are the 4 main ways in which I feel that F1 Manager 2022 really missed the mark. Every game that has ever released has a target audience in mind, or at least it should. In the case of F1 Manager, I'm not so certain they had a really clear strategy going into the development of the game as to who exactly they were making the game for. Now, the first decision to make was, were you going to make a game for casual fans or for hardcore fans? If you wanted to appeal to the casual market, you'd go in the same sort of direction that Motorsport Manager went in. This means including zany antics from the drivers, cartoonish graphics, and injecting humor wherever you can. Alternatively, and I think more sensibly in this case, they could have appealed to a more hardcore market. This is exactly what the incredibly successful Football Manager series does. That series is a hardcore football fan's dream. There's so much depth and so much strategy that goes into it. Ultimately, F1 Manager 2022 doesn't really appeal to either side of things. On the one side, there's nothing cartoony about it and there's not a lot of humor injected into the game. Meanwhile, on the other, the depth can be somewhat lacking, which we'll investigate in point 2. That brings me to my next point. F1 Manager 2022 presents itself as a game with great depth and a lot of analysis to be done. Think about it. When you go through the menus, there's all kinds of different car parts and a whole lot of numbers to look at. Ultimately, most of these complex numbers are a smokescreen. A strategy that F1 Manager 2022 employs is using a lot of decimal places for all of its numbers. By doing so, they create the illusion of depth. However, when it comes to actually designing the parts or adjusting them for your car's setup before a race, you just have sliders to work with. There are a finite number of options there that really actually limit the depth that the game can go to. Another way that this can be seen, particularly when compared to Football Manager, is in the driver ratings. In F1 Manager, the drivers are rated on 9 numerical categories, and from that an overall is defined. On the other hand, compare that to Football Manager. There, each player is rated on 39 different numerical categories. It's easy to see how much more depth there is on the Football Manager side of things when it comes to the players or the drivers. Because of this lack of depth, it's hard to get things wrong, or really to get them right. Even though it may not feel like it, you're kind of being railroaded in a direction. It's very hard to avoid developing a successful team once you're 3 or 4 years into the career mode. If the game feels that way, it's hard to derive satisfaction from the improvement that you find. One of the reasons the F1 Manager was so primed for success when it released was because F1 itself had reached an all-time high in terms of popularity. Not only that, but the team principles and all of the behind-the-scenes aspects of Formula One were really in the spotlight and being focused on by many more fans of the sport than they ever had before. The reason for this? Drive to Survive. If a lot of the popularity of F1, and particularly in the management side of the real-life sport, is tied up in what people see in Drive to Survive, then surely it's important for F1 Manager to capture some of the political intrigue and drama that is so inherent to that series. However, that is something that F1 Manager completely fails to do. This is something that Motorsport Manager actually succeeded in, even though it was made by such a small group of people and such a long time ago, all the way back in 2014. In between races, there were dramatic events that would take place. A driver would come to you and tell you that they had joined a cult. Obviously, these examples play more into the light-hearted nature of the Motorsport Manager series. However, having this sort of drama, having some kind of event, something that actually happens between the races, is very important to make you feel like you're in a world which is alive. And moreover, if you want to have that proper team principle fantasy, you need to have political intrigue. And finally, let's talk about the one single biggest problem that I have with F1 Manager 2022. There are no loot boxes. That's weird. No, I don't want to do it like that. Think about every single sporting game you've ever played. Football Manager, Motorsport Manager, FIFA, Madden, NFL Head Coach, whatever you can think of, they all have one thing in common. In their career modes, you can scout and develop new talent. An important part of this process is what I would call a loot box mechanic. In each of these games, when you first scout a player, or a driver, you don't know how good they're going to be. What that means is when you send your scouts to take a look at the exact right person, you feel a great sense of reward when it turns out that they have a potential that's through the roof. In F1 Manager, the scouting of young drivers is completely devoid of any sense of this. Going into the game, you already know the overall ratings of all the young drivers. So you never get this true sense of satisfaction of finding a diamond in the rough. Ultimately, F1 Manager 2022 is a solid foundation. It's a building block upon which a truly great series can be developed. However, in its current form, it really misses the mark. Of course, we expect the F1 Manager series to have a new release every single year, as we've become so accustomed to with all kinds of sporting franchises. However, in the case of F1 Manager, I think this would be more justified than in some other games, particularly at the moment. This is because there's so much potential to build upon, and so little of it is currently realized. Therefore, it's easy to develop a game which has a lot more depth in it pretty quickly. What I'm hoping to see from F1 Manager 2023 is a major step up on what can essentially be viewed as a prototype initial version. That is, of course, only if the developers actually spend time working on the things we want to see, rather than adding a 6th voice line for Nico Hülkenberg's cat.
Thank you so much, Jacob, for sharing your opinions with us. If you enjoyed this type of content, why don't you head down to the comments below and tell us everything about that. Maybe you agree or disagree with some points we made. And if you want to know what's best to buy for iRacing, then taking a look at this video will help you figure that out in no time. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, cheerio.